The year 193 AD dawned with surprising news. The Emperor Commodus had been assassinated, and within 24 hours, a new emperor from a new family was in charge. Pertinax, a man who had risen through the ranks of the Roman military, a strict disciplinarian, and a reformer. But as we saw last time, Pertinax may have tried to do too much too quickly, making enemies of his own Praetorian Guard and finding himself assassinated after just 3 months of rule. His potential successors then made bids for the empire, offering the Praetorians higher and higher salaries for the right to be sole emperor. The winner of that so-called auction was a man named Didius Julianus, and because of the weakness of his reign on the city of Rome, 3 more men, all on different ends of the Roman Empire, made their bid for power. What followed was the Year of the 5 Emperors, and a civil war that would last for several years and leave Rome in the hands of a new kind of emperor, a warlord. We'll talk about who he was and the brutality he used to gain power on this episode of the Pax Romana podcast. Episode 59, The Year of the 5 Emperors. So we're not even halfway through the year 193, and we've already had 2 emperors in Rome. 3 more men would declare themselves for the top spot. The first of these was the governor of Syria, Pescennius Niger. This man was a military commander supported by elites in the eastern provinces, most especially Egypt. Obviously a crucial region, as we have mentioned before, for the food supply of the city of Rome. Without Egypt, it would be impossible to feed the population of Rome. This, of course, undercut Didius Julianus, the current emperor in Rome, almost immediately. Niger, however, only had the 3 legions that were stationed in the east, so not a massive army. At the other end of the empire, the governor of Britain, a man named Clodius Albinus, also was declared emperor and also had 3 legions. Britain, of course, was nowhere near as central to the economy of the city of Rome as Egypt was, and I wonder if his strategy was aimed at waiting out the civil war that was brooding, hoping that the various claimants would weaken each other and then he would be able to invade Rome from the northwest. Finally, a 3rd man declared himself emperor, and this guy would be a real problem for Didius Julianus for 2 reasons. This was the senator and governor of Pannonia, Septimius Severus. Pannonia was an important province not only because it bordered the Danube and was home to some of Rome's most experienced legions, but the sheer number of troops there, and these were personally loyal to their governor Septimius, made Septimius the commander of the largest army in the conflict, 16 legions. Septimius, however, wanted to be more than just a warlord. He could, through brute force, have simply marched on Rome unopposed and taken it over as a conqueror. And that's basically what he did, but he also used propaganda effectively to suggest that he was legitimate to do so. First of all, he took on Pertinax's name, honoring the memory of the dead emperor and inflaming the sentiment that Didius Julianus was somehow responsible for Pertinax's death. The other thing that Septimius did was secure one of his flanks. Assuming, I think rightly, that Clodius was planning on waiting out the war anyway, Septimius secured his support by offering to rule with Clodius, forming an alliance. Clodius would take the title of Caesar and also add Septimius's name to his own, while Septimius Severus would become full Augustus. And so, with a massive army behind him and at least a tentative alliance secured with one of his potential rivals, it's at this point that Septimius then marches on Rome. Meanwhile, in the city, Didius Julianus had very little resources to mount a sufficient defense of the city. Rome had impressive walls, but without a large army to defend them, it would just be a matter of time before Septimius found his way in, either by brute force or by someone in Rome ordering the gates open to avoid the wrath of Septimius, who was almost certain to win the conflict. Even though the deck was stacked against him, Didius tried to bluff his way out of the situation. He sent emissaries out to Septimius to negotiate a deal, but the emissaries immediately turned on Didius and joined Septimius Severus. Didius Julianus then sent a message to Septimius, outright offering Septimius the right to be co-ruler. This, too, Septimius rejected. And so by the time Septimius made it to the walls of Rome, it was clear that Didius Julianus was hanging on to the city by a thread. Septimius tried to end the battle before it even began, sending a message to the Senate with the following command: bring the murderers of Pertinax to justice. The Senate knew what this meant. Although Didius Julianus did not actually kill Pertinax, he might as well serve as a useful scapegoat. And so the Senate dutifully declared their own emperor a public enemy, killed him, declared that Septimius Severus was the legitimate emperor, and then held a deification ceremony for Pertinax. A delegation from the obedient Senate then went out to meet their new emperor in the field outside of Rome and escort him into Rome as a hero who liberated the city from a tyrant. Now in Rome, Septimius Severus went about reorganizing the city to prevent future civil war. He did, after all, have a weak alliance with Clodius and an enemy in the Eastern Empire that he needed to deal with. An enemy, by the way, that had a stranglehold on the grain supply, so something would need to be done quickly. The new emperor dismissed the Praetorian Guard, which makes sense. As we've seen in this podcast, these are the men that tend to assassinate emperors. It would be good for Septimius to have his own people in the Praetorian Guard. He nominates all new men, filling thousands of positions at once. He garrisoned several of his legions then around the city of Rome to prevent somebody from doing the thing that he just did, march on the capital of the empire. He then sent men out to capture the children of Pescennius Niger, the rebellious governor of Syria, to hold them as hostage against their father. After just a few weeks, maybe a month, Septimius left the city that he conquered without a battle, moving to the east to take on his most important rival, Pescennius Niger. Septimius did not have to go all the way over to Egypt or even Syria. He just went to the westernmost major city that had declared for Niger. This was the Greek city of Byzantium, a well-defended city that Severus immediately besieged, cutting off the city's water supply. He then used his fleet to blockade the Bosphorus, preventing supplies from reaching the city by sea. The siege appears to have lasted at least a year, maybe two, but eventually, due to famine and thirst, the city capitulated, was sacked, and many of its inhabitants were sold into slavery or executed. As Septimius moved deeper into Asia Minor, he accumulated a string of victories, again at major sites, Nicaea, Cyzicus, and Issus in 194 AD. That last battle opened the way toward the eastern capital of Antioch, the most powerful and populous city in the region. Sources don't give us the detail of many of these battles, including the siege of Antioch. We know that Septimius prevailed, that Pescennius Niger fled, maybe attempting to go to the Parthians, Rome's enemy. Unfortunately for him, however, he was caught by Septimius' soldiers and beheaded. His wife and children were executed. And although Septimius had chased this rival all the way to the eastern edge of the empire, it was worth it. Pescennius Niger was easily the strongest and most strategically well-positioned of the usurpers in the year of the 5 emperors, apart from Septimius himself. Septimius had to like his chances of not only surviving, but setting up a new dynasty. The only question is, what would he do with Clodius? Would he pick diplomacy? Would he face Clodius in open battle? Well, his initial choice was actually a third way. In 195, less than a year after defeating Pescennius Niger in the east, with Septimius still far away from Rome, Septimius attempted to assassinate Clodius Albinus. Albinus, around this same time, cast off the title of Caesar which was associated with the junior emperor or an heir of the emperor, and took on the title Augustus, full emperor, equal with Septimius. But of course, a title would not be enough for Clodius to resist the surging Septimius. He needed to gather an army, and a big one, and this pretty quickly, because Septimius was going to come for him. Albinus was able to gather a massive force, not only drawing upon Britain, but probably also Roman allies nearby in Western Europe, and he accumulated an army that probably numbered close to 100,000 men. He also moved out of the island of Great Britain onto the European continent, setting up in the city of Lugdunum in Gaul. This is modern-day Lyon in France. It was a strategically important city, a major crossroads in the Western Empire. The move was a bold one, and it showed that Clodius was not going to continue to wait around. He was going to take the fight towards Septimius. This inspired several of the Western governors to join with Clodius. So what Septimius Severus initially thought would probably be something close to a cakewalk now turned into a very serious, well-balanced conflict with a rival that could match him in terms of alliances and also military strength. The two fought in an open battle at Lugdunum in the year 197 AD. It would be one of the largest battles ever fought in Roman history up to that point, with Septimius bringing around 100,000 soldiers to match Albinus's 100,000 soldiers. Many of these men were seasoned veterans from all over the empire. It was unlikely that any side would immediately flee. There would have to be a lot of killing before the winner was determined. This one lasted 2 full days, and although we don't have a lot of details about what happened, it sounds as though the fighting was relentless and intense. And at one point, Septimius' center may very well have wavered, almost leading to defeat. Eventually, however, Clodius's forces either ran out of steam or he simply lost too many troops. The tide turned, and Albinus himself was either captured and executed, or he committed suicide. As his victory became total, Septimius shored up all the loose ends. He executed Albinus's family and punished the city of Lugdunum, and allowing his troops to pillage, rape, and burn a city of about 30 to 40,000 inhabitants. So what started in 193 as a year of 5 different emperors concluded just a few years later in 197 with a single man at the top of the ruins of the Pax Romana, Septimius Severus. As you can see from this massive civil war that crisscrossed the empire, this new ruler was no Marcus Aurelius. He was a brutal man, punishing whole cities that were disloyal to him and surrounding himself with soldiers. Was this an emperor or was it a warlord? Certainly many Roman senators would have had the same question. And in character, Septimius Severus attempted to be both. After defeating all his rivals, he took on a new name, Antonius, after Marcus Aurelius, and sent word to the Senate that he was adopting himself posthumously into Marcus Aurelius's family as his son and the brother of Commodus. Such a thing had never been done by a Roman emperor, and it was a superficial and desperate attempt to suggest that there was some form of continuity between Septimius Severus and the much more peaceful and beloved emperors of days that were now long gone. But if anyone thought that was serious, they received a rude awakening when Septimius returned to Rome. The Greek historian Herodian tells us of what happened when Septimius returned to a city that had been loyal to him the entire time, but nevertheless had some elites in it who were still associated with some of his rivals, distant family members and friends and otherwise. This is what Herodian says, quote, "The angry emperor," that's Septimius, "took vengeance upon the friends of Clodius Albinus in Rome. Septimius sent the man's head to the city and ordered that it be displayed. He then took his entire army to Rome. The members of the Senate were terror-stricken. Septimius went into the Senate house and, mounting the imperial throne, launched a bitter attack upon the friends of Clodius Albinus. Then, without warning, he put to death all the eminent senators of that day, together with those men in the provinces who were noted for ancestry or wealth, pretending that he was avenging himself upon his enemies, when the truth was that he was driven by an insatiable lust for money. No other emperor was ever so greedy for gold. It was a homecoming to forget, and the inauguration not just of a new dynasty, but of a new form of government, alien to that of the Pax Romana. An age in many ways not of emperors, but of warlords.
Thanks for listening to the Pax Romana podcast. For more information, including a list of primary sources and further reading, check the show notes. Music by Red Productions and Exocore. Follow Professor Colin Elliott on X at ProfCPE or email colin@paxromanapodcast.com. Listen to more episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or just about anywhere podcasts are available. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.